Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Bradley Turner has always been the kind of man who followed a very clear logic: work hard, maintain order, and take care of what he built with effort. Since he was young, his discipline was almost like a trademark. Over the years, he built a solid career in the technology sector, accumulating promotions, respect, and stability. His lifestyle required sacrifices, and one of them was time. At least once a month, he would go on trips for meetings, international fairs, and negotiations with investors. He always came back loaded with gifts, stories, and that gentle way that made everyone around him believe his life was an example of success. And indeed, for any observer, it really was. The house he shared with Madison was in a nice neighborhood, surrounded by friendly neighbors and with silent rules about how to behave. Madison was loved by everyone. Elegant, polite, articulate, the kind of woman who knew how to talk to anyone about anything. At dinner parties, she knew exactly when to laugh, when to compliment, and when to change the subject to avoid discomfort. To many, she was the soul of the parties and the pride of the neighborhood. The couple was always remembered as an example of harmony. And perhaps because of that, no one ever suspected anything. Not even Bradley, who believed that his routine was the fair price to pay for a peaceful marriage and a comfortable life. Madison, however, had a different way of seeing things. She felt like she was living a well-rehearsed play. A play that demanded perfection in every line, in every gesture. And maybe that's what led her to look for something that reminded her she was alive. During a regular afternoon at the gym, while doing a series of leg exercises, she locked eyes with Carter, the new personal trainer at the place. He had a quick smile, confident body language, and that kind of attention that doesn't go unnoticed. Over time, they started talking about trivial things: posture, diet, muscle pain. Gradually, the conversations became longer. They began laughing together, sharing experiences and inside jokes. When Madison realized it, she had already included Carter in her daily routine. The physical involvement was just a consequence. The first time they were together happened in an isolated parking lot, inside his car. Madison left with her heart racing and a feeling that mixed guilt with excitement. From that moment on, she made a decision: if she was going to keep this up, she would have to control everything. She wouldn't leave any traces, marks, smells, or clues that could put the image of the perfect wife she had built at risk. Carter lived in the same gated community as them, a few streets away, which made everything easier and riskier at the same time. It was a large neighborhood, with wide streets and similar-looking houses, which made discretion easier but also required caution. Madison considered meeting him in hotels or cafes but quickly dismissed those options. Public places increased the chances of being seen, and she knew that a single mistake could destroy everything. That's when she decided that the safest option would be to use her own home, since Bradley traveled at least once a month and stayed away for a whole week. Inside her home, she would have total control. There, she could predict every move. Being naturally organized, she developed a meticulous system. Every time Bradley left for a new trip, she took pictures of the rooms in the house. Chairs, rugs, curtains, cushions. Everything was photographed in detail. After Carter left, Madison reviewed each photo one by one, comparing angles, objects, and even marks on the floor. If anything was out of place, she fixed it before her husband returned. This ritual repeated itself for weeks. Carter always entered through the back door. He never left anything of his in her house. If they ate something, she washed and put it away before any smell or trace remained. Madison went so far as to note the exact times of Carter's journey to her house, to ensure he never crossed paths with a curious neighbor. She believed the secret was safe because her intelligence protected her. And indeed, everything seemed under control. No delays, no accidents, no messages exchanged at the wrong time. Carter was discreet, he followed instructions. He knew Madison was married and, in a way, seemed comfortable with that condition. He never asked her to leave her husband, never questioned the hidden meetings. They saw each other, enjoyed their time together, and went back to their lives as if it were part of an invisible agreement. During one of their encounters, Carter mentioned that he admired how cold and confident she was. He said it was impressive how she managed to hide everything, as if she had trained for it. Madison just laughed, saying that smart people know how to keep secrets. But deep down, she knew the game she was playing was dangerous. Still, she felt in control. Her biggest fear was letting a detail slip, but every return of Bradley only reinforced her confidence. He never asked anything strange. He never showed any suspicion. He remained loving, kind, and attentive, as always. They had dinner together, talked about work, laughed at old jokes. The routine stayed the same. And for Madison, that was confirmation that her plan worked. Until that moment, everything was where it should be. And she believed that if she kept acting with precision, nothing would change. When Bradley returned from his trip, he didn't have the same smile as usual. He was serious, reserved, almost cold. Madison noticed the atmosphere as soon as he walked through the door and asked if everything was okay. He responded that he needed to talk. They went to the living room, sat on the couch, and she expected something mundane, maybe work news, a family issue. But when Bradley opened his laptop and turned the screen toward her, her world stopped. He started showing images. Videos. Audio recordings. Madison fell silent, her eyes wide open, unable to hide the shock. There were no screams, no words. Just the evidence in front of her, and the expression of a man who already knew everything. A month earlier, the scene had been completely different. Bradley had returned from yet another long trip. Upon arriving, he hugged Madison affectionately, smelled her familiar perfume, and thanked her for everything. He went upstairs, took a quick shower, and when he came down to grab a beer from the fridge, something caught his attention. He grabbed the can, opened the fridge again, and stood there for a few seconds. There was one missing. He had the habit of mentally counting how many were left, and he clearly remembered leaving 6. Now there were only 4. He thought for a moment. Madison never liked beer. She always preferred white wine. Did someone stop by? A friend? A quick visit? During dinner, the conversation flowed lightly, but the doubt was hammering in his mind. At one point, without sounding suspicious, he asked how her week had been. Madison answered naturally, saying everything had been calm, that she had taken the opportunity to organize some things around the house and rest. Then, as casually as possible, Bradley asked the question. And did you have any visitors this week? Madison's eyes widened slightly, she hesitated for a fraction of a second, but maintained her composure. No, no one. Why? He responded without showing any emotion. Nothing, just asking. Sometimes your sister comes by, or your parents. Madison, relieved, gave a slight laugh. No one came by this week. You should invite them more often, Bradley added with a gentle smile. Especially when I'm away. So you don't feel so alone. She just nodded, and the conversation continued. But Bradley had already made a decision. He wouldn't say anything about the beer. The next day, without making a fuss, he bought a security camera kit with motion activation and started installing them discreetly whenever Madison was taking a bath. He used that time to position the devices strategically, behind books, in lamps, in the hallway, and a small lens under the shelf in the living room. He knew that if something was happening, he would need proof. 3 weeks later, he left for another trip. But this time, the laptop went along with a different purpose. He wanted to observe, understand, confirm. In the first 2 days, everything seemed normal. Madison walked around the house, cooked, watched TV, cleaned the garden. Nothing out of the ordinary. But on the 3rd day, just before 2 in the afternoon, the alert on his phone went off. He opened the transmission from the camera at the back door and held his breath. Carter entered as if it were his own house. He walked through the kitchen with familiarity, opened the fridge, grabbed a beer, and sat on the couch. A few minutes later, Madison appeared, smiling. The two embraced intimately, and right there in the living room, they began undressing. Bradley froze. He felt his blood boil, anger burning in his chest, but he held back the impulse to call. This needed to be faced face to face. Carter stayed for hours. They talked, laughed, walked around the house as if it were theirs. Bradley couldn't sleep that night. He barely managed to work during the entire week. While everyone thought he was participating in important meetings in another state, he was there, glued to a screen, watching his life crumble in real time, and gathering evidence for what was to come. The scene returns to the moment Madison faces the laptop. The videos playing in front of her left no room for denial. She tried to stay composed, but her eyes quickly filled with tears. She brought her hand to her mouth, as if trying to contain something that was already slipping away. The tears began to fall. The silence was heavy, almost suffocating. She looked at the screen, then at Bradley, unsure where to begin. She tried to explain herself, her voice trembling. I felt lonely. You traveled so much, Anne. I didn't plan this. I swear. Bradley remained still, observing the scene with an expression that mixed hurt and disappointment. The pain he felt was visible, but there was something even stronger, the coldness of someone who had been betrayed by the person they never expected. He took a deep breath and, with a firm voice, spoke while looking directly into her eyes. Do you know why I found out? Because of a beer. One damn beer, Madison. I saw everything through the cameras. I saw you taking pictures of the living room before he arrived, adjusting the cushions, checking every detail, as if preparing a set. And after he left, you put everything back exactly as it was. Every object, every folded towel. You thought of everything. Except the beer. Your lover got thirsty. He opened my fridge and took one of my beers. And that's when I realized. A beer. That's all it took for me to understand that my house wasn't mine anymore. Madison cried silently, trying to approach him, but he stepped back. If I hadn't noticed that, how long would you have kept going? How long? Were you going to greet me with a kiss and then run to him as soon as I boarded the plane? Is that it? She tried to say something, but he interrupted her. Enough. Go. Get up. Pack your things and get out of my house. Now. Madison hesitated. She cried like someone who had just lost their footing. But Bradley didn't wait. He got up, went to the bedroom, opened the closet, and started throwing her clothes into a suitcase. Silently, she followed him. She didn't dare ask to stay. He went downstairs with the suitcase, opened her car, and threw everything onto the back seat. She got in without saying a word. He stood there, staring. No kiss, no hug, no goodbye. Just the image of a shattered woman leaving the house where she had built her lie. Madison went to her older sister's house that night. And Bradley stayed there, standing in the garage, looking at the empty street, feeling the bitter taste of someone who didn't just lose a spouse but also the trust in everything he once believed was real. Bradley didn't let the matter end with the pain of separation. As soon as Madison left the house, he contacted his lawyer and initiated divorce proceedings, based on marital misconduct, a term recognized by North Carolina law that allows the betrayed spouse to seek legal advantages during separation in cases of proven adultery. But Bradley went further. With the evidence in hand, videos, camera footage, and screenshots, he also filed a civil lawsuit against Madison and Carter, based on the alienation of affection law, still valid in some U.S. states, including North Carolina. This law allows the betrayed spouse to sue the lover for interfering in the marriage and destroying the emotional bond between husband and wife. The judge carefully examined the evidence. The videos were clear. The dates matched Bradley's trips. Carter's involvement was constant, and Madison, despite being careful, had left the mistake that revealed everything. Given this, the judge didn't hesitate to grant the divorce with terms largely favorable to Bradley. The house stayed with him. The joint accounts were frozen and later closed. The division of assets was done according to the agreement Madison had always avoided, and which was now imposed without negotiation. And more, the civil case proceeded. Months later, the final decision came. Carter and Madison were found responsible for the destruction of the marriage. The court ordered both to pay significant compensation to Bradley, as reparation for the emotional and moral damages caused. It was a hard blow for the two. Carter lost several clients from the gym where he worked, his name circulated in local forums, and he had to move. Madison, who valued control and appearances so much, now lived with a tarnished reputation and drastically affected finances. In the end, everything collapsed because of a single slip-up. One simple beer. Madison, after leaving the house where she had lived for so many years, was taken in by her older sister. For a while, she stayed secluded, too ashamed to even go out on the street. People talked, and although no one said anything directly, she felt the looks piercing through her like knives. She had to rebuild her life. The money had dwindled, expenses were tight, and she knew she couldn't keep relying on the goodwill of her family. She started looking for a job, resume in hand, jumping from interview to interview until, weeks later, she landed an administrative position at a mid-sized company. The salary was modest, far from the standard she was used to, but it was what she had. She sat every day in front of a simple desk, performed her tasks diligently, and brought lunch in a container. The woman who once controlled every corner of her own home now barely had space for herself in her new work environment. It was a bitter but necessary fresh start. Bradley, on the other hand, moved on with his life. He continued in his executive position, now with more freedom and peace of mind. The monthly trips were still part of his routine, but the weight of leaving home had lessened. He returned with the certainty that no one was taking his place, and that was liberating. The lonely nights in hotels became moments of reflection, and no longer of suspicion. He felt lighter, more attentive, more centered. He didn't let himself become hardened, but he also didn't allow the past to guide his next steps. Over time, he returned to places he had left behind, like the bar he used to frequent with his childhood best friend. It was there that he told him everything. Between one drink and another, he revealed the details, the doubts, the exact moment he realized everything, and the twist caused by a beer. His friend listened in silence, sometimes widening his eyes, sometimes shaking his head. When Bradley finished, his friend put the glass down on the table, looked at him, and said, "Man, I learned something from your whole story. Never mess with another man's beer." They both laughed. They laughed genuinely. And for the first time in a long time, Bradley felt like he could breathe a sigh of relief. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.
Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Michael had realized a long time ago that the marriage was falling apart, but he kept trying to ignore the signs. The affection was gone. Touching became an obligation. Conversations were limited to practical things about daily life, and when they did happen, they ended in sharp remarks, raised voices, and averted eyes. Rebecca, his wife, no longer bothered to hide the coldness with which she treated him. If he came home from work early and tried to start a conversation, she would lock herself in the bedroom or put on headphones. And when he tried to understand what was going on, he was accused of controlling, suffocating, exaggerating. Over the months, everything became too heavy. Michael started walking around the house in silence, avoiding conflicts, trying to maintain an artificial peace just to keep things from getting worse. But nothing helped. Any small gesture was a reason for arguments. A misplaced glass, a comment about dinner, Even the way he walked across the living room seemed to irritate her. What hurt him the most wasn't the anger, but the indifference. At a certain point, it felt like he had ceased to exist within that home. It was as if he were an inconvenient guest living with a stranger. When silence settled between them, it was no longer uncomfortable. It was normal. And it hurt. It hurt because Michael remembered the days when she smiled just at the sight of him coming home, the way she rested her head on his shoulder at the end of the day, the way they could understand each other with just a glance. That was in the past, and he didn't even know when exactly everything had been lost. On that specific night, tension had been in the air since breakfast. Rebecca wasn't talking to him. She ignored his presence as if he were a ghost in the house. Then, without warning, during dinner, she slammed her utensils on the table and said she couldn't take it anymore. Michael, exhausted and not understanding what had triggered this outburst, asked what was going on. She stood up and began shouting, saying she needed time, that she was suffocated, that she wanted to be alone. She complained about the routine, the lack of excitement, his presence. She said he drained her. And then, coldly, she asked him to leave the house for a few days. She just needed to think, she said. Michael stayed frozen for a few seconds, looking at the woman he loved, who now seemed like nothing more than a stranger filled with anger. He asked her if she was sure. She impatiently replied yes. Without arguing, without fighting back, he climbed the stairs, grabbed a backpack, and threw some clothes into it. He didn't know how long he'd be gone, or if he'd come back. As he came downstairs, Rebecca was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone as if nothing had happened. He left with the backpack on his shoulders and his heart shattered. He went straight to his brother's house, who greeted him with a worried look. Michael said he needed a few days, that things were complicated. He chose to omit the details, trying to believe it might just be a passing crisis. But the pain in his chest told him otherwise. Something there was broken beyond repair. Even away from home, Michael kept up with his work routine, pretending a normalcy that didn't exist. The nights were long. His thoughts, noisy. And despite everything he heard, despite the way he was pushed out, there was still inside him a foolish hope that she would call him back. Maybe it was all a misunderstanding, maybe she was going through something. Maybe she still loved him. Clinging to those maybes, on any given afternoon, he decided to drive past the house where he had lived so many years. He wanted to see if the lights were on, if her car was in the driveway, if anything gave him a clue about what she was feeling. He parked across the street and left the engine running. His gaze fixed on the house where he had shared so many moments with Rebecca. He didn't plan to get out, just wanted to check if the lights were on, if there was any sign of regret. But what happened next hit him like a punch in the gut. The front door opened, and a well-dressed man with a relaxed expression stepped out of the same entrance where, years before, Michael and Rebecca used to share laughter together. He smiled, adjusted his watch as if leaving after a pleasant meeting. Then she appeared. Rebecca came to the door with a smile Michael hadn't seen in a very long time. Without hesitation, she approached and kissed the man. A simple, intimate kiss. That destroyed any doubt. This woman who had kicked him out claiming she needed space was with someone else. And it wasn't recent. There was too much intimacy for it to be new. Michael froze in the driver's seat. His hands trembled on the steering wheel. His heart raced. Unable to control his anger, he got out of the car, leaving the door open, and stormed across the street. His blood boiled. When he reached the front of the house, he raised his voice. "What's going on here?" The man turned his face, surprised. Upon recognizing Michael, he looked flustered. He didn't say a word. Avoided eye contact, backed away, and ran straight to his car. Rebecca, pale, tried to say something, but gave up. She took a step back and went inside, closing the door quickly with fear and shame. Michael stood there, unfiltered. He cursed at Rebecca, let out everything that had been bottled up for weeks. The words spilled out loaded with hurt, disappointment, and a pain hard to describe. In no time, neighbors began peeking out their windows. Some spied from behind curtains, others stood by their gates, whispering. He didn't care. He was hurt, betrayed, humiliated. He shouted again, then took a deep breath, turned around, and walked back to the car. He got in, slammed the door, and drove off, his eyes full and his chest emptier than ever. The image of that kiss wouldn't leave his mind any time soon. It was over. But at that moment, he didn't yet know that while he was losing a marriage, he was about to gain something much greater. The hours following that scene outside his own house were a blur in Michael's mind. He drove aimlessly, passing streets he knew well, but which now felt strange. His chest still burned. The image of the kiss, of the man leaving the house as if he owned the place, of the door being closed by Rebecca without a single word, it all replayed like torture. When he arrived at his brother's house, he didn't say anything. He went upstairs to the guest room, collapsed onto the bed, and stared at the ceiling, trying to figure out how everything had gotten to that point. The feeling was a jumble of emotions colliding. Anger, shame, sadness, frustration. As much as he had his faults in the marriage, he deserved better than this. He deserved respect. Honesty. Rebecca didn't even have the courage to tell him what was really going on. She made up needing time, asked for space, but was already with someone else. And perhaps she had been for a long time. That certainty hurt more than any fight they'd ever had. In the following days, Michael barely ate. He went to work out of obligation, did the bare minimum, and returned straight to his room. The TV was on, serving only to mask the silence, but inside him, everything was noise. One random night, he went out for a walk without direction and ended up entering a discreet bar he'd always noticed but never visited. He sat in a corner, ordered a drink, and stared at the glass as if trying to see the future inside it. That's when she appeared. Grace walked in alone, ordered something at the counter, and, glancing around, noticed Michael sitting alone at his table. Her approach didn't feel forced, it was as if she genuinely wanted to sit there, not just out of pity. She asked if she could share the table, he nodded, and she sat down. For the first few minutes, they hardly spoke. Then she commented on how he looked like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. And he, for the first time in days, responded honestly. He said he was going through a tough time, that he had left home, that his marriage had fallen apart in a cruel way. Grace didn't react with ready-made advice or clichés. She simply listened. And that was a relief. She didn't judge him, didn't interrupt him, just let him speak what he wanted, at his own pace. After letting out everything that had been stuck in his chest, Michael felt a strange relief, as if part of the weight had flowed out along with the words. Grace smiled lightly, said he was stronger than he thought, and, before saying goodbye, suggested they exchange phone numbers. He agreed. He took out his phone, typed in her number, and, for a moment, felt that this simple gesture marked the beginning of something different. Michael called the waiter, paid both their bills, thanked her for the conversation, and left the bar with lighter steps than when he entered. Still hurt, still lost, but a little less alone. In the days that followed, they exchanged simple messages. A good morning here, a question about whether he'd eaten, a shared song. Grace became present without taking up space. Michael felt less suffocated. She didn't want anything from him, didn't demand answers, just offered companionship. One night, he finally opened up completely and told her everything. From the coldness at home, to the request for space, to the kiss he saw from the car. Grace listened to every word, and when he finished, she took a deep breath and said simply, "That says more about her than it does about you." It was a simple phrase, but it hit hard. For the first time, Michael began to see himself with less guilt. He didn't fail alone. Rebecca chose to leave the relationship in the worst possible way. In the days that followed, the two began seeing each other more often. Nothing with big expectations. It was coffee, a walk, a long phone conversation. Michael felt that, little by little, something inside him was changing. Grace never rushed anything, never demanded what he couldn't offer. She just walked beside him, respecting his pace. It was light. For the first time in a long time, he felt at peace. One night after they went out for dinner, Michael and Grace were leaving the restaurant. They were walking hand in hand to the car, still laughing about some silly thing she had said about dessert, when a voice charged with anger cut through the air like a punch. Rebecca. She was standing there, leaning against her car, her eyes wide and her face twisted with a mix of rage and surprise. She pointed at the two of them and, without hesitation, began shouting. "We're not divorced yet. You're still my husband. What are you doing with this woman? Who is she? How long has this been going on?" She fired accusation after accusation, her breathing labored and her tone increasingly out of control. Rebecca expected Michael to react the way he had last time, exploding, yelling, losing control. But the man standing in front of her now was different. He remained calm, steady, his eyes fixed on hers, not raising his voice, not backing down. He held Grace's hand naturally, as if that were the right place. And that infuriated Rebecca even more. Seeing him at peace broke her down. The control she thought she still had evaporated in the face of his serenity. When she finally stopped talking, waiting for a reaction, Michael took a deep breath and spoke firmly, without a trace of hesitation. "First, step back, just as a precaution. You're upset, and I don't want you to do anything reckless. Second, you kicked me out of the house, bags in hand, with no intention of listening to me. Third, you cheated on me. And, to be honest, I'm sure it started before that day. Despite the paperwork, we haven't been married for a long time. So please, go away. And don't contact me again." Rebecca was speechless. Her expression was that of someone who had lost the game before realizing they were playing. Her shoulders dropped, she took 2 steps back, looked at Grace with poorly disguised disdain, but didn't say another word. She got into her car, slammed the door, and sped away. Michael and Grace stood in silence for a few seconds. He still held her hand, as if reaffirming a choice. Then they opened the car door and left together. No shouting, no confusion, no looking back. This wasn't just the end of a chapter. It was the beginning of a new story that, for the first time in a long time, had peace written right on the first line. After the confrontation in the parking lot, Michael understood that it was time to close that chapter definitively, with no room for emotional relapses or loose ends that could drag him back to the past. He knew that, though his heart had already made its decision, there were still papers, contracts, and assets tying him to Rebecca. And this time, he would make sure to leave fairly. He wouldn't allow the man destroyed by betrayal to also be the man undervalued in the end. He hired a lawyer experienced in contentious divorces. Not out of revenge, but as a strategy. Rebecca tried to start conversations with a conciliatory tone, as if, after everything, they could resolve matters between themselves and avoid unnecessary bureaucracy. But Michael was direct. He wanted the house sold, the investments divided, each keeping their own car, and no alimony of any kind. There were no children, no financial dependency. Each would walk away with what was fair. Rebecca resisted at first. She tried to appeal to his guilt, saying he was being cold. She tried to reverse roles, accusing him of forcing an aggressive separation out of wounded pride. But he remained firm. He didn't give in, didn't back down, didn't let himself be manipulated. Her lawyer argued that she had sacrificed some personal plans to sustain the couple's stability. Michael listened to everything in silence and, when it was his turn to speak, gave a simple summary: she chose someone else. Now she needs to live with her choices. And that's exactly what happened. The house went up for sale. It was a place full of memories, some good, others unbearable. Michael insisted on overseeing the process, watching each step until the sale was completed. When the money hit the account, it was split down to the last cent, no favors, no compromises. The couple's investments, accumulated over the years, were also divided. And as for the cars, it was clear from the start, each would keep their own. What bothered Rebecca most was knowing Michael wouldn't be obligated to pay alimony. She expected to maintain some kind of control, some financial tie, but she walked away with exactly what belonged to her. No more, no less. The process was finalized. When Michael signed the final papers, he felt something unexpected: peace. Not joy. Not celebration. Just peace. It was like stepping out of a dark place where he had grown accustomed to the shadows. Now he could see more clearly who he was, what he tolerated, and, most importantly, what he would never accept again. With the divorce resolved, he finally began rebuilding his life from scratch, but this time consciously. He started taking care of himself again. He resumed projects he had set aside, invested in a course he had always wanted to take, and renovated the old apartment he had inherited from his father. Grace was always nearby, but without intruding. They moved forward together, respecting each other's pace, without exaggerated promises, but with a commitment that grew stronger every day. Over a weekend, the two decided to take a short trip to unwind. They rented a simple house, far from the noise. On the third day, while having coffee, Michael asked if Grace wanted to see something funny. He took a small box he'd brought in his suitcase, opened it, and showed her some old photos he had found during the renovation of his father's apartment. Pictures of him as a child, as a teenager, and even one where he was dressed up for a Halloween party. She laughed, got emotional, and held one of the photos for a while. "You've been through so much, but look where you are now," she said, her eyes shining. Michael smiled. For the first time, he didn't feel like he was just overcoming trauma. He was living. A short time later, he decided to host a dinner at home and invited his brother and a few friends. He wanted, symbolically, to introduce this new phase to the people who had stayed by his side even when he only offered silence and exhaustion. During dinner, one of the friends joked, saying Michael looked younger, lighter. He laughed, looked at Grace, and replied, "It's because now I sleep in peace." A few months passed, and Grace discovered she was pregnant. When she told Michael, he hugged her without saying anything for a few seconds. He was happy, of course, but what overwhelmed him was a sense of purpose. He thought about everything he had been through, the nights in his brother's room, the dragging days, the judgments, the fear of never rebuilding himself. And now, here, with a new life on the way, he realized that everything had made sense. Every fall, every loss, every tear. It had all pushed him to this moment. The birth of their son marked the final chapter of the story he thought he had lost. Holding the baby in his arms, Michael looked at Grace and felt such intense gratitude that he could barely put it into words. That child not only represented the beginning of a new family but was also proof that starting over, no matter how painful, is worth it. He hadn't won a war against Rebecca. He had won the war against himself. And, finally, he had found his home, not in walls or contracts, but in people who truly knew how to love. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.